We do want to welcome a guest. I'm going to ask our team if Duncan is ready to join us. All right, let's bring in Duncan Larcombe, former royal editor of The Sun and author of Prince Harry, The Inside Story. Duncan, welcome to Outnumbered. I know that you have been on many days with our network and just doing a fabulous job as you join our Fox family. I want to start off with what we saw this morning in terms of the culmination of that Operation London Bridge. Put it into context for us.
Yes, well, I mean, thank you for having me on, by the way. I'm loving this now. This is a real change of gear. We're now gossiping about the royals, and that's where
oh, no, we're not gossiping. You're going to talk to us with facts.
No, I'm gossiping, not you. No. Yeah, no, so, Operation London Bridge, as you rightfully say, goes back decades, certainly quite clearly planned for the past 25 years. But there would never have been a rehearsal as such on the whole scale. Different military units, different, some of the men you've seen in those regalia and stuff, they will have rehearsed, they will be very chaptered on what has to happen. But one thing that nobody knew, even the Queen, nobody knew what the population would do, what the people would do. And I think that's the icing on the cake, I think, for us, because yes, these things have been planning for a long time, but nobody makes tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people queue along the 28 miles it takes from driving to London to Windsor. That's spontaneous. No one made anyone queue up for 18 hours in the cold and the rain just to walk past her coffin. So we're all, honestly, I honestly think that we're all a little bit shell-shocked at the moment, because just when you think you know what's going to happen with the royal family, something seems to happen to turn that on its head. And Prince Charles was the chap that not that many years ago was being dismissed as a tree hugger. Actually, in those terms, a guy who talked to his tomato plants to help them grow.
Oh, I had not heard that.
He's in a marriage now with...
I do the same.
No, it was a while ago, but he was passionate about the environment. That's in the 80s and the 70s. Now we're in the 2020s, and the environment issue on a global scale is right up there. So a guy that was written off by a lot of people, certainly not regarded as someone that was going to ever follow in his mother's footsteps with any aplomb. Actually, I think the country now is sort of thinking, well, hang on a minute. Actually, let's give this King Charles chap a chance, you know. I mean, let's face it, he's waited 70 years. He's done the longest apprenticeship in history. So
well,
I suppose it would be unfair of us now to say it should go straight to William. 70 years,
because then he just would have been 3. But okay, I hear you. But definitely he has been there, right?
Let me tell you, he tried to... When the Queen had her coronation in 1953, young Charles, I think 5 years old at the time, when the Queen came out with that incredibly heavy crown that we've seen, it's become a feature of the past 10 days, that's the sovereign's crown. Prince Charles actually tried to put it on his head, and the ladies in waiting watched as the Queen, just having been made the Queen, came out and told him off in a very nice way. 70 years later, next year, 71 years later, that crown will go on his head next. So I think he has been waiting, you know. I think he has.
So Duncan, talk to us a little bit about this private service and how this will differ from what we've seen.
Well, as you say, yeah, with the public, because of the technology that we have now, in contrast to when the Queen took over from her father, we have seen some of the glimpses of ceremonies that go back thousands of years. I have to say, it's been quite fun at times. There was one moment where the Lord Mayor of London, I think the day or 2 days after the Queen's death, had to announce it on the steps of St Paul's Cathedral. Standing next to him was a man with a sword almost as high as him, another man wearing a pair of tights and holding what looked like one of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and he looked like he was wearing one of Camilla's winter hats. So that's what we do in Britain, so that you guys take us seriously. So, you know, thank you for that. But it's our madness, and we're proud of it, especially today.
Hilarious. I had no idea, Emily, what he meant by the former Prince Charles talking to the tomatoes in the garden. Like, I didn't know that meant that you were like watching for climate change. I didn't have the context that you had. I was worried that he was talking to inanimate objects. But I got you.
Yes.
I got you.
I talk to my plants, and it helps them thrive.
Well, if I'm wrong, I'm going straight to the Tower of London in a minute. So.
I note that you referenced the Queen consort as Camilla, and I wonder if it will take a transition period there for those under King Charles III's reign to sort of get used to their new titles.
I think that's true. The Queen, obviously, one of the last sort of major things she did before her death was to tell the public it was her wish that Camilla, the woman once, don't forget, dubbed by Diana as the Rottweiler, was going to be Queen Consort. So that's the natural title. It's the same title that Kate will have when Prince William becomes king. Camilla was a very controversial figure, and I actually I covered her wedding to Charles in Windsor Castle, actually in the Guildhall, because they weren't even allowed to get married in St George's Chapel that we've just seen because of the divorce issue. And you know, the police were there looking around, and they didn't know. They were wondering whether people would have eggs and banners, and you know, it would be a protest against Camilla. Actually, as it turned out, as we know, when Camilla and Charles emerged, all that was thrown was love and waving flags and cheering. So the issue of Camilla's transition, if you like, from the dark days of Diana, that's been happening some time now. And I think since 2005, the public might not have fallen in love with Camilla, but they have learned to respect her and to say good on her for doing such a good job over the past 17 years. And King Charles is a better king, or will be a better king, I would argue, with Camilla by his side, if that makes sense. And I think the public feel that that's the sentiment.
You could definitely see the love between them, no doubt, Duncan. You know, you mentioned not quite knowing what to expect, the royal family, in the wake of this death of Queen Elizabeth II, but what we've seen, to your point, has been this tremendous outpouring of support from the United Kingdom and beyond. And it struck me that the last time a monarch died and we went through these traditions and these procedures was 1952. So it's been a long time since the people of Great Britain have seen this kind of pageantry, a really honorable event. I imagine you've got to feel deeply proud if you are in the United Kingdom today to have 500 heads of state, royals, foreign dignitaries all congregate in one country, something like we've never seen before. It has to be a moment of pride and a moment of, I would think, affirmation of the monarchy and its place within British society.
Do you know, thank you. It's actually really hard to try and put your finger on what it feels like. I mean, in the past few days when the Queen's body was lying in state, the atmosphere around London has changed. Where she was held, the Palace of Westminster, that's where our Parliament is. And I don't know whether any of you have ever watched live debates of our politicians, but they're like bears.
They're all
in a
over
pit.
YouTube.
I mean, it is angry.
Yeah.
It's horrible, the atmosphere. But then in the same building, you have real class. And I don't mean that in a class society, I mean a touch of class. Somebody who, how many billionaires get to their 96th birthday when they've hardly ever been lavish their whole lives? The Queen used to have her breakfast on her table at Buckingham Palace out of I don't know whether this translates, but Tupperware. Do you have that in America? Like plastic pot.
Yes.
That's what she had her cereal stored in, like my grandmother, I think, and she'd sit there with a newspaper called the Racing Post to learn about the horse racing that day. She was not a woman for gold plates and people peeling her grapes. She was down to earth. So.
Wow. I didn't even know that was an option. I got to get my teenagers to work harder.
We learn.
You know, I had mentioned before, and it is going to be shortly before 2:30 p.m. Eastern today, that private service for Queen Elizabeth II, and I wanted to bring that up so that people are, you know, if they're looking at the screen right now, they see that at Windsor Castle people are still gathered. While that committal service has wrapped up, there is more to come today, and really you get the sense, Carly, that, and we have the schedule, so we kind of know when things are happening, but you get the sense that people will let go when they're ready, and that might not be on the schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that Duncan brought up the queue or the line that has formed to honor the Queen and pay their final respects. And at some points they were saying it was 4 or 5 miles long, and it really did become this living, breathing, moving embodiment of how respected the Queen was. And so people are going to linger there because this really does mean so much to the British people, the Commonwealth as a whole. And now we were talking about what is to come next, and the popularity of the king. And there was a poll that shows that Charles and Camilla, their popularity has skyrocketed over the past 10 days because he has opened himself up a little bit more. On top of that poll now, though, is Prince William, who is now the heir to the throne, because I think people do see him as the future, a very strong future, and also possibly even a little bit more relatable than the king and queen consort.
Well, and there's also the concept, I would think. I mean, obviously we can't predict, and wouldn't even want to try to predict one's reign, the length of reign, but in your almost mid-70s now, this king will decidedly not serve as long as his mom.
Right.
I mean, we haven't seen anything like that on the planet.
Yeah, 70 years seems unlikely.
Yeah, it seems unlikely, but we want to be kind and gracious about it. But what that would mean to me is that William is more than just the king in waiting. He's the apprentice, like on a daily basis now. He's right in there more than perhaps Charles ever was as a younger prince, because his mom was younger at the time.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true. And he's not likely to have 7 decades, right? So his timeline will be compressed as well. But I'm confident that the royal family has been preparing him too, right? With this day was inevitable. The age gaps have been, we've known. I'm confident that he too is preparing his family, those that come behind him as well. This is the tradition that has allowed this monarchy to continue to be this important component of the United Kingdom for so long. I think he'll do a fantastic job, and I think King Charles will manage to do that in a way that is his own. It is right. Yeah. It won't be the way that Queen Elizabeth did it, but he'll take it on. He'll make it his own, but he will keep the central traditions of service alive.
You know, I'm curious, Emily, about, you mentioned, Carly, the popularity of particularly William, but he comes with Kate Middleton too, who's also extremely popular and very fashionable. And a mom and all those things that women look for to see, and she's in control, right? Yeah. Please don't ask her the balance question. Don't we? How do you keep it all balanced? Which is nothing anyone would ever ask the secretary. But when you look at this, I mean, now they have 2 couples to focus on, because people are also going to be getting to know the Queen Consort in ways that maybe they haven't before.
Right, that's such a great point. And I think to your statement earlier that already public sentiment and approval has really skyrocketed over the last 10 days, we've talked about before that perhaps King Charles, with the utmost respect, is being viewed as a bridge to the newer generation and a bridge to the newer monarchy. And so perhaps the public will view him and the Queen Consort with respect and generosity and kindness and intrigue and curiosity. Especially in light of the fact that a lot of focus by the media has been on the younger ones, but also with that longevity in mind, meaning eyes toward the future of the monarchy, which is Prince William and Princess Kate, which I feel like I'm referring to them because now they're the Prince and Princess of Wales. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. So I want to make sure that I get it all straight. So I think that there's a measure of hope and excitement in addition to that respect and reverence for the current king. But I think it's sort of eyes looking ahead at the next train stop.
Do you think we get a pass because we've known them now as celebrities for their lives more so than royalty? Do you think we get a pass and can call them Wills and Kate? You know what I mean? I mean, maybe not to their faces because they have those titles, but as we talk about them, haven't we always called them? It's like Wills, it's not even William.
Yeah. Well, it's like Mr. Larcombe just now referring to Camilla as Camilla, right? It's hard. I mean, and after 70 years, I think it'll be maybe an adjustment, but I think, to the institution, we've been speaking about the grandeur of the institution, everything it represents.
Different than the people that we've come to know, maybe.
And so those that operate within it with solemnity and purpose and dedication, I think will have an easier time transitioning to the titles rather than us who are like, wait, who is it again? I'm trying to get it straight. But of course, all with reverence and respect in mind.
You were with President Trump at a time when he was meeting with the royals. And what did he ever say about those meetings?
Oh, he loved Queen Elizabeth. You know, there were certain figures that he would bring up their names constantly because you could tell he just looked to them with total admiration. And I think one of the names that came up, I would argue one of the top 3 names would be Queen Elizabeth. He had such respect for her, and I think it says a lot when you can, I just saw a statement put out by President Barack Obama, when you can have the respect of President Obama and President Biden and President Trump and Tony Blair and Boris Johnson, and these cross-party divides that this one figure managed to bridge together. It speaks to her life of sacrifice. And yes, she was born with so many blessings. There's no doubt about that. She had a blessed life. But the sacrifice that entailed, weeks and weeks apart from your children as a mother, you know how hard it is to leave your little ones for a day or two. She did this for weeks on end because she loved her country and she put her country right there with her family. I think today, as we look to Queen Elizabeth, we just remember a life that put above everything love of country, unity, and sacrifice. And I think she embodied those words, and my former boss certainly knew that about her.
Did he get to meet the now king, Charles III?
He did. He met
Former
Charles
president?
III. I was not with him. Sarah Sanders was with him at the time, but he met Charles III.
Yeah.
You know this, Secretary Pompeo. He met the Queen, all of the royals.
Yeah, he did. He enjoyed her company a great deal. I cannot say that for every meeting with every leader around the world.
Well, you were there.
I was at a lot. I was at a lot of them. It was, but he admired her, and she was so decent. And they developed this. They didn't spend hours together, right? But they did this decent relationship where they could have real conversations about the challenges that they faced as leaders and the work that they know they each had to do. He truly enjoyed her company.
We have about a minute left, and you mentioned a word that we don't hear very often. And I realize that this isn't politics that the Queen would have been into, but she was talking to politicians. Decent.
Yeah, she was fundamentally decent. I think it came from her faith. I think it also came from how she viewed her duty. I think she saw her duty as using language that was inclusive, language that understood the tradition of the nation and how to bring it forward. If you go look at her remarks that she made in public, they were always decent. It's something a lot of us, even me, it's those of us who serve in public life, if we thought about that a little more and were able to execute that way, I think our country would be better off for it as well.
Amen.
Well, don't wear it all on your own shoulders. We need to do it too,
Yes.
all of us,
Yes.
to show each other grace and decency and love, just at every moment we have.